I said enough. You stop kicking that wall right now, you hear me?
Nestled in the vast expanse of rolling hills, Green Ridge Ranch stood as a testament to one man's ambition and success. Owned by Derek Thorne, a billionaire who had built his fortune from the ground up, the ranch was more than just a business. It was a symbol of his legacy. The towering oak trees that lined the perimeter, the golden fields that stretched as far as the eye could see, and the sleek, modern barn where his prized horses lived all painted a picture of unmatched wealth and tranquility. But amidst the serenity of this sprawling estate, there was one problem that refused to be ignored. In the farthest stall of the barn, a magnificent stallion named Thunder had become the source of endless frustration. Thunder, with his jet-black coat and fiery spirit, had always been a special horse, one Derek had personally handpicked. Yet recently, the animal had turned into something of a mystery, kicking relentlessly at the wall of his stable, day after day, hour after hour, without reason. The loud, rhythmic pounding echoed throughout the ranch, breaking the peaceful atmosphere that Derek cherished so much. Despite his vast resources and experience, Derek found himself at a loss. He had called in trainers, veterinarians, even animal behaviorists, yet nothing seemed to quiet the horse. Thunder's incessant kicking only grew louder, more intense, as though the stallion was trying to communicate something deeper, something more primal. Derek had built an empire from sheer willpower, solving problems with precision and money, but this time, his usual methods of control weren't working. It seemed the horse wasn't just kicking at the wall, but at something far more significant. Derek Thorne had always been a man who thrived on control. Every decision he made, every move he took, was calculated, deliberate. He had built Green Ridge Ranch from the ground up, transforming a modest piece of land into one of the most prestigious equestrian estates in the country. His wealth wasn't just a result of good fortune, it was the product of sharp instincts, hard work, and an unyielding drive to succeed. And yet, in the face of Thunder's relentless kicking, Derek found himself powerless. For weeks, the sound had become a constant companion. The thudding against the wall echoed in his ears even when he was miles away, in the heart of his corporate empire, in meetings with investors, or even at gala events. Nothing he did seemed to stop the madness. He had spent a small fortune consulting the best in the business, renowned equine specialists, animal psychologists, even a highly regarded horse whisperer. Each expert had offered their own advice, their own theories, but all had fallen short. Some said Thunder was bored. Others suggested it was anxiety. One even hinted at some unresolved trauma from his past. But none of their words had meaning to Derek. To him, this wasn't just a behavioral problem, it was an affront to everything he had built. He couldn't understand why, despite his ability to control everything else around him, this horse was beyond his reach. At night, Derek would find himself walking through the barn, staring at Thunder through the bars of his stall. The horse's wild eyes stared back, unblinking, full of intensity, as if daring him to find the answer. But every time Derek tried to approach, Thunder would kick again, the powerful hooves slamming against the wood, sending splinters flying into the air. As a billionaire, Derek had the resources to fix almost anything. His company, Thorne Enterprises, could buy entire cities if need be. But no amount of money could change the horse's behavior. And worse, it seemed the more Derek tried to solve the problem, the more it gnawed at him, leaving him feeling vulnerable in a way he never had before. For the first time in his life, Derek Thorne was facing a challenge he couldn't conquer with his wealth, intelligence, or influence, and it was driving him mad. It was late afternoon when the frustration finally reached its peak. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the barn. Derek had just returned from a high-stakes meeting with potential investors in New York. He had spent the entire day reassuring them of his vision for expanding his business empire into international markets. He was used to negotiating powerfully, controlling every room he entered, but today felt different. The thrill of the deal had barely settled in before his mind turned once again to Thunder's incessant pounding. For the past few weeks, he had kept his emotions in check. He tried to remain patient, to approach the situation logically, as he always did. But every time the horse kicked, thud, 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 it gnawed at him, chipping away at his composure. The ranch was his pride, his sanctuary. To have something so uncontrollable within its walls was maddening. By the time Derek reached the barn, the horse was already at it again. The rhythmic thumping reverberated through the walls of the stable, relentless and deafening. Thunder was in a frenzy now, kicking with abandon, his powerful hooves tearing at the wooden paneling as if trying to break free. The wall was already splintered from weeks of abuse, but the horse seemed oblivious, fixated on its futile, destructive rhythm. Derek stood at the entrance of the barn, his jaw clenched, watching the scene unfold. His heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the heat rising in his chest, his temper bubbling just beneath the surface. The weight of the frustration was unbearable, and in that moment, Derek realized something he hadn't admitted to himself before. The problem with Thunder wasn't just the horse, it was him. He was no longer just irritated by the horse's behavior. He was ashamed of his own helplessness. All of his money, all of his success, and yet here he was, powerless before a single animal. Without thinking, he marched into the barn, his boots echoing on the cold floor. The sound of Thunder's kicks grew louder as Derek approached the stall, and the horse's eyes met his. They were wild, almost desperate, but for a moment, Derek saw something else in them, something he hadn't recognized before. It wasn't just chaos. It was pain. The realization hit him like a freight train. For weeks, he had viewed Thunder's behavior as a nuisance, a puzzle to solve, a problem to fix. But now, for the first time, Derek understood that the horse was trying to communicate something. It wasn't just a tantrum. Thunder was hurting, mentally, emotionally, and perhaps even physically. Derek's mind raced. What if the horse wasn't just acting out for no reason? What if it was a cry for help? But that moment of clarity was short-lived. Thunder kicked again, louder this time, the sound shaking the barn. It was as if the horse was challenging Derek to do something, to make him feel the urgency of the situation. The rancher's patience snapped. His eyes darkened, his jaw tightened, and in a flash of rage, he reached for the nearest tool, a heavy sledgehammer that had been left by the door. Derek swung the hammer with all the pent-up frustration that had been building inside him for weeks. The weight of the tool felt natural in his hands, a familiar extension of his anger. The first blow landed with a deafening crack, splintering the wood like a crack of thunder itself. The force of it sent a shudder through the barn, but Derek didn't stop. He swung again and again, each strike harder than the last. The wall, once sturdy and reliable, crumbled before him, the pieces of wood falling away in jagged shards. The sound of destruction filled the air, drowning out the horse's frantic kicks. Sweat poured down Derek's face, his breath coming in heavy gasps as he lost himself in the sheer release of power. For a moment, he wasn't a billionaire, a businessman, or a rancher. He was just a man, consumed by his own emotions, breaking through the physical and emotional barriers that had been holding him back. As the last piece of wood shattered, Derek stood still, the sledgehammer hanging limply in his hand. The barn was silent now. The horse had stopped kicking. Derek stood among the wreckage, breathing heavily, feeling an odd mix of satisfaction and exhaustion. It was done. The wall was gone, the tension in the air dissipating. But as he looked at Thunder, still standing in his stall, Derek realized that the battle wasn't over. The horse's frantic behavior had been only a symptom of something deeper. The wall had fallen, but the emotional walls inside him were still intact. He had broken the barrier between him and the horse, but what about the barriers inside himself? Derek's anger still burned, but now it was directed inward. Derek stood frozen in the barn, staring at the wreckage of the wall he had just destroyed. The sledgehammer hung from his hand, heavy and cold, like an extension of his fury. He could feel his pulse thumping in his temples, the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He had done it. He had smashed through the barrier, not just the wall but something deeper inside him. But even as the dust settled around him, a strange emptiness lingered. His chest still felt tight, his breath shallow, as if the anger hadn't quite dissipated. Thunder stood still in the stall, his chest rising and falling with slow, measured breaths. The stallion's eyes were wide, but not wild. They held an eerie calmness now, as though the chaos had momentarily subsided. Derek had never seen the horse so quiet. The animal's incessant kicking had stopped, but a different kind of tension hung in the air. For a moment, the barn felt unnaturally silent, just the sound of their breaths mingling in the stillness. It was as if the very walls had absorbed all the noise, leaving only a heavy, quiet weight behind. Derek's body trembled slightly, the aftermath of the sheer force he had just unleashed. The wreckage of the wall lay in front of him, chunks of wood scattered across the barn floor. Splinters pierced the air as if the destruction itself wasn't finished yet. Derek could feel a sudden wave of guilt, a strange sense of regret that followed the release of his frustration. Was this really the answer? Was smashing the wall the solution to everything? He had broken it, yes, but at what cost? The sight of the damaged stall, the wood splintered and cracked, mirrored something else inside him. He realized that in his rage, he had acted like the horse, repeatedly kicking at something he couldn't control, something he couldn't understand. The horse had been trying to break free of its own invisible barriers, and now, here he was, doing the same thing. But unlike the horse, Derek had the power to rebuild. Yet, even as his mind churned with these realizations, the rancher felt a sharp pang of pride. The destruction had released something from within him. His frustration, his anger, everything that had been bottled up had burst forth in that one furious moment. There was power in that. He had acted on impulse, and for the first time in weeks, the world didn't feel quite as heavy. For just a second, Derek felt free. He glanced at Thunder, who remained calm, unblinking. It was as if the horse understood the release of energy, the need for something to be shattered. Thunder's behavior hadn't just been about rebellion, it had been a cry for something more. Just as Derek had needed to break free, perhaps Thunder had, too. Derek lowered the sledgehammer, wiping the sweat from his brow. His heart slowed, and the tension in his shoulders began to ease. He knew he couldn't simply leave the barn in ruins. The wall had been broken, but now came the task of rebuilding, not just the barn, but whatever it was that had been broken between him and the stallion. For a long moment, Derek stood there in the wreckage, breathing in the stillness of the barn. The air was thick with dust, but beneath it, he felt a shift, a change. He had done something irreversible, and somehow, that felt liberating. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt as if he had regained control, not of the ranch, but of himself. Guess we both needed that, didn't we, Thunder? Derek muttered, the words barely audible, but the horse seemed to acknowledge him with a soft snort. Derek stood amid the wreckage, his hands still gripping the sledgehammer, now more an extension of his frustration than a tool. His breath came in sharp, uneven bursts as his mind raced, trying to make sense of the chaos he had just unleashed. The barn was a mess, wood splinters scattered like broken promises across the floor. Yet amidst the destruction, there was a strange kind of silence, an unnatural calm. He glanced over at Thunder. The horse had stopped moving, its body tense but not frantic. The stallion's ears flicked back and forth as if it were listening for something in the stillness. In that moment, Derek felt the weight of his own emotions, rage, helplessness, frustration, rushing to the surface. It was as though all the years of quiet battles, internal struggles, and repressed desires were finally breaking free. Without warning, a guttural sound tore from Derek's throat, a primal roar that reverberated through the barn. It wasn't a scream of anger, it was something deeper, something born of raw emotion. It was the sound of a man releasing everything he had kept hidden for far too long, the culmination of months, even years, of fighting battles he couldn't name. The roar echoed off the walls, filling the space around him. It was a defiance, a release, a scream for freedom. As it echoed into the barn, the air seemed to shift. Thunder's ears perked up, and for the first time, the horse didn't seem like an enemy, it seemed like a companion in the chaos. Derek's roar faded, leaving him breathless and spent. His hands trembled, the sledgehammer slipping from his grasp and hitting the floor with a soft thud. But in that moment, Derek Thorne felt something shift within him. He wasn't just a billionaire. He was a man. And for the first time in a long while, he felt alive. As the dust settled in the barn, Derek stood still, his chest heaving with each labored breath. The roar had released something within him, a flood of emotions he had buried for years. He looked around at the shattered remnants of the wall, at the barn that had once symbolized control and order, now reduced to chaos. But beneath the destruction, there was a sense of clarity, a weight lifted. Thunder stood quietly in his stall, watching Derek with a calmness that felt almost profound. It was as if the horse had recognized the shift in the rancher. Both had been trapped in their own battles, each breaking in their own way. For the first time, Derek didn't see the stallion as a problem to be solved, but as a companion in struggle. He wiped the sweat from his brow and sighed, the tension in his shoulders slowly ebbing away. There was much to rebuild, not just the barn, but the connection with the animals, with his own self. Derek knew this was just the beginning. He wasn't the same man who had walked into the barn hours ago. The need for control, the fear of vulnerability, those barriers had cracked, just like the wall. And for the first time in a long time, Derek Thorne was ready to face life, not with force, but with understanding and a renewed sense of purpose. The next morning, the barn was quiet. The remnants of the shattered wall had been cleared away, and Derek stood in the doorway, watching the first light of dawn filter through the gaps in the structure. The ranch felt different, lighter somehow. The air, once thick with tension, now seemed fresh with possibility. Thunder was grazing peacefully in the field, his powerful body moving with an easy grace that Derek hadn't noticed before. The stallion's energy had shifted, too. There was no more frantic kicking, no more desperate pounding against the walls. It was as if the horse, in some strange way, had found peace after the storm. And perhaps, in his own way, Derek had, too. As he watched the horse, Derek realized that the wall he had broken wasn't just wood and nails. It had been the wall he had built around himself, a barrier to his own emotions, his vulnerability, his connection to the world around him. He had been so focused on control, on keeping everything in place, that he had forgotten to feel. Now, as the sun rose higher, Derek took a deep breath, the weight of the past few days settling in his chest. There was much to rebuild, but for the first time in years, he was ready to let go, ready to change.